If you think civilization began with farming, this story will challenge that timeline. In southeastern Turkey, archaeologists uncovered stone monuments more than 12,000 years old. Older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, and older than any known monumental architecture on Earth. And in 2025, new discoveries across the region began sharpening an answer to a question we've been asking for decades. Who built these monuments, and why? What researchers uncovered challenges what many of us learned in school and forces a rethink of how civilization itself may have begun. This is the Taş Tepeler Project, the Stone Hills, a network of ancient sites in southeastern Turkey that archaeologists have been excavating for more than 20 years. For most of that time, the most famous site, Göbekli Tepe, stood alone as a mystery, a massive ritual complex built by hunter-gatherers who were believed to have no cities, no farms, and no permanent settlements. But the 2025 field season began to challenge that assumption. Between September and November, 3 independent research teams working at 3 different sites announced discoveries that shifted the picture. They found carved human faces inside domestic-scale structures, chambers containing carefully arranged human skulls, and a life-size human statue sealed into a wall as a deliberate offering. These were not isolated sanctuaries. They pointed to connected communities. Let's look at exactly what was found, starting with a discovery that strongly supports a theory proposed more than 20 years ago. In early October 2025, a research team at Karahan Tepe uncovered something no one expected to find. A T-shaped stone pillar, about 135 centimeters tall, roughly the height of a 10-year-old child, carved with a human face staring directly outward. Deep eye sockets, a broad nose, and sharply defined cheekbones. For years, archaeologists had suggested that the T-shaped pillars represented stylized human figures. The crossbars symbolized shoulders. The vertical shaft represented the body. But critics argued the shapes were too abstract. Perhaps they were simply functional architectural elements. This discovery strongly supports that long-standing interpretation. What makes the find especially significant is where it was located. It wasn't found in a temple enclosure. It was discovered inside a small, clay-plastered room carved into the bedrock, surrounded by 2 smaller T-pillars that likely supported a roof. This space appears to have been domestic in scale. And inside that space, a sacred object had been deliberately placed. Researchers have suggested for years that the T-pillars represent the human form. This pillar provides compelling new support for that idea. But the carved face wasn't the only surprise. Just meters away, archaeologists uncovered something that offers a glimpse into how these people thought and remembered. A set of 3 tiny stone figurines, a fox, a vulture, and a wild boar, each about 3.5 centimeters tall and roughly 11,500 years old. They were nested inside one another, container within container, with each animal's head carefully placed inside a small limestone ring. Someone had taken time to carve them, arrange them, and deliberately seal them away. The craftsmanship alone suggests the presence of skilled artists. But more than that, the careful arrangement points to shared stories and collective memory. These people weren't just builders. They were storytellers. And if they had artists and shared memory, what else did they have? The answer came from a site about 50 kilometers away, and what researchers found there was genuinely unsettling. At Sefer Tepe, roughly 50 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, another research team uncovered a small chamber containing 12 human skulls. Most had no jawbones attached. No other skeletal remains were present. This was not a typical burial. It appears to have been a deliberate collection. The community had selected specific skulls, removed them from earlier graves, and placed them together in a single chamber. Why? Researchers suggest this practice may have been a way of keeping ancestors present, maintaining an ongoing relationship between the living and the dead. But nearby, just a few meters away, they found additional skulls still attached to complete skeletons, buried intact. Two different mortuary practices at the same site, possibly from different periods. Some ancestors were kept in communal memory spaces. Others remained whole, perhaps preserving family bonds. The dead were not simply buried and forgotten. They were actively managed. Among the finds at Göbekli Tepe, one object stood out. A tiny polished bead carved from black serpentinite, no larger than a pea, with two human faces carved on opposite sides. The level of detail required to carve something so small is extraordinary. Even more revealing were the materials found alongside it. Jade, labradorite. Stones that do not originate in this region. They came from hundreds of kilometers away. This was not an isolated settlement. People here were connected to distant regions, connected to one another. And if communities were trading across vast distances more than 10,000 years ago, how did we miss it for so long? The answer points to a long-standing blind spot in archaeology. For decades, Göbekli Tepe stood alone in textbooks, a cathedral on a hill with no village around it. The assumption was simple. Hunter-gatherers traveled from far away, built the ritual center, and left. They had no permanent homes and no settled communities. That's likely what many of us were taught. But consider what that assumption implies. People capable of carving 10-ton stone pillars with precision, organizing large labor forces, and designing complex ritual spaces, yet living as wandering nomads with no fixed base. How did they coordinate construction? How did they feed workers for years at a time? How did they pass specialized knowledge from one generation to the next if they were constantly moving? For decades, archaeologists worked around these contradictions. Göbekli Tepe was treated as an exception, so unique that normal rules didn't apply. But the assumption was based on incomplete evidence. Beginning in the 2020s, the Taş Tepeler project expanded excavations across more than a dozen sites simultaneously. Kadahan, Sefertepe, Sabir, Çakmaktepe, Harbetsuvan, and others. What emerged changed the picture completely. Domestic structures, ovens, food processing areas, burials, public buildings. The interpretation shifted. 12,000 years ago, this part of Anatolia appears to have supported densely populated settlements of different sizes. Daily life and ritual were intertwined. The sites shared a symbolic language, T-pillars, animal reliefs, human imagery. But each community adapted those symbols in its own way. Connected, but not identical. By 2025, more than 200 scientists and students from dozens of institutions worldwide were working to understand how these early communities lived. And yet, the most dramatic discovery of the year came from the site that started it all. Back at Göbekli Tepe, the UNESCO World Heritage Site that first shocked the world, archaeologists revealed a new find in September 2025. A life-size human statue embedded flat into a wall between two massive stone structures. It wasn't standing upright. It was lying on its back, sealed into the wall as if deliberately hidden. Why would someone carve a detailed human figure and then immediately conceal it? Researchers interpret the statue as a ritual deposit, an offering meant to remain unseen, a gift to something greater than the builders themselves. And the fact that it was built into a permanent wall suggests something important. They expected the structure to endure. They were not planning to leave. The announcement described Göbekli Tepe as the zero point of history and suggested that this discovery would shed new light on Neolithic belief systems. Together, these three discoveries bring us closer to answering the question we began with. Who built these monuments and why? Not wandering groups passing through, not primitive people stumbling into architecture by accident. These were connected communities, building homes, creating art, honoring their dead, trading across vast distances, and sharing a symbolic language across an entire landscape. They built monuments because monuments are what settled societies do. The birth of civilization didn't happen the way we thought. It may have begun here more than 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years separate us from the people who carved that face. But standing before it, something still connects across that impossible distance. Someone shaped those eyes, knowing others would see them. Someone carved stone, knowing it would outlast their own life, just as you're seeing it now. The fox, the vulture, and the boar, sealed together in stone. The skulls arranged to keep ancestors present. The statue hidden inside a wall as an offering. These weren't primitive rituals. They were sophisticated acts of memory, meaning, and connection. But some of the clearest evidence that these communities were recording meaning, not just performing ritual, is carved into a single pillar deep inside Göbekli Tepe itself. Deep inside the world's oldest known temple complex at Göbekli Tepe, there is one pillar that has drawn more debate than almost any other. It is known as Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone. Göbekli Tepe was erected around 11,500 years ago in what is now southeastern Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey. It provides some of the earliest evidence that large human communities were gathering, organizing, and building monumental structures long before the rise of agriculture. The Vulture Stone is decorated with a striking array of animal symbols: a scorpion, an ibex, multiple birds shown in different poses. At the bottom of the scene is a headless human figure. Along the top edge are large repeating arches and square-like forms carved into the stone. For decades, archaeologists have debated what these symbols represent. One hypothesis suggests they may not depict animals alone, but symbolic references to the night sky. In this interpretation, the scorpion corresponds to the constellation Scorpius. A duck-like figure may represent Libra. A wolf symbol has been linked to Lupus. The circular shape near the center is interpreted as the sun. According to this theory, the arrangement of these symbols reflects a specific alignment of constellations and the sun at a particular moment in time. When researchers tested this idea using computer simulations of the night sky as it would have appeared in deep prehistory, they proposed a possible date around 10,950 BCE. That date coincides with a dramatic event in Earth's climate history, the onset of a sudden cooling period known as the Younger Dryas. This temporary mini-ice age lasted roughly 1,000 years and profoundly altered environments across the northern hemisphere. Some scientists believe the Younger Dryas placed extreme pressure on hunter-gatherer food sources. Colder temperatures, declining plant availability, and disrupted ecosystems may have forced people to cluster together, experiment with cultivation, and eventually form the first permanent settlements. Within this interpretation, the imagery on the Vulture Stone takes on a darker meaning. The headless human figure may symbolize death or catastrophe. The streaming shapes near the top of the stone have been interpreted as fragments moving across the sky, possibly representing a comet or cosmic event remembered by those who carved it. If this reading is correct, the Vulture Stone may represent an attempt to symbolically commemorate a traumatic moment in human history, not as myth, but as memory encoded in stone. It suggests Göbekli Tepe may have served not only as a ritual center, but possibly as a place where the sky itself was observed, tracked, and symbolically recorded. It's important to note that this interpretation remains debated. Not all archaeologists agree with the astronomical reading of the pillar, and no single explanation has been universally accepted. What is certain is this: less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe had been excavated. And with most of the site still buried, discoveries like the Vulture Stone remind us how much remains unknown, and how many layers of meaning may still be hidden beneath the soil. Whether the Vulture Stone records a cosmic event, a cultural memory, or something else entirely, it fits a larger pattern now emerging across the Taş Tepeler region, one where belief, memory, and settlement were deeply intertwined from the very beginning. The Neolithic era marks one of the most important transformations in human history, a shared chapter in all of our pasts. The next time you gather with family around a meal, the next time you tell a story, the next time you place a photograph of someone you've lost where you can see it, you're continuing something that began here. We didn't invent ritual, we inherited it. And now that you've seen what researchers uncovered across the Taş Tepeler region, the question becomes unavoidable. What else is still buried beneath the parts we haven't excavated yet? Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered so far, and the story is far from over.